You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is John Rubino, author of several books on the economy, including The Money Bubble, his website, dollarcollapse.com. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey, Jim. Good to talk to you again.
It's a pretty interesting time to be taking a look at finances in the world right now, the Greek economic system teetering on collapse. Maybe a comment on that. Is the problem the Greek people are lazy and just don't know how to work, or are the people who run the money system in Europe, in other words, the Germans, just so powerful you have no chance to resist them?
Well, the setup of the euro contained a fatal flaw to begin with, and that was that you have a common currency, but within that common currency, each constituent country runs its own budget and issues bonds denominated in euros, but they're really, a Greek bond is still a Greek bond, Spanish bond is still a Spanish bond. And so early on, people didn't understand that, and the global financial markets took all euro-denominated bonds as basically the same thing, and that allowed Spain and Portugal and Ireland and Greece to borrow incredible amounts of money at German-level interest rates. So, of course, they did, and they got deeply indebted. And now they're trying to dig their way out, but there's really no way to do it within the structure of a fairly sound currency, because what used to happen with these marginal countries that didn't run their budgets very well is they'd get into trouble by issuing too much debt and printing too much currency, and then they would have to devalue. So they'd lower the value of the peseta or the drachma or whatever, and that would make their exports attractive, and so they would kind of recover. Well, they can't do that within the framework of the euro, because they can't print their own currency and they can't devalue the euro unilaterally. So they're all kind of stuck. And Greece is the most extreme example of that, because they lied about their numbers to begin with to get into the euro, and it's only gotten worse since then. So the question now is, what do they do with countries like Greece and Italy and Spain, which are really incapable of living within their means temperamentally? And so Greece is kind of a test case. They either leave the Eurozone, go back to the drachma, devalue the drachma, and then go on as they have gone on for the hundreds of years before they joined the Eurozone, which causes insane amounts of turmoil across Europe and huge amounts of losses to the people who own Greek bonds, which will be converted into peseta or to drachma bonds and devalued, or they find some way to keep Greece in the Eurozone, which brings with it its own ugly compromises that nobody wants to be involved with. So they really don't have a good solution right now. And the fact that Greece is a small country whose numbers don't really matter that much to the Eurozone is less important than the precedent that it sets, because anything that happens with Greece is probably going to happen to Italy in the not-too-distant future, and that's a big deal. Italy's a major country, and whatever happens to Italy will affect the Eurozone and the global financial system dramatically. So what we're seeing right now is the beginning of the process, possibly of the unraveling of the Eurozone, or possibly of the German takeover of the Eurozone. A complete, they'll bring the banking system together so that there's one currency, one central bank, and one set of budget management for everybody. Sort of like in the U.S., where the federal budget dominates everything, and Germany will be in control of that. So nobody likes that alternative either. So they don't really have any good choices right now. But they're going to have to choose something, because in life you don't have the option of just not choosing. That's still a choice. And so in the next 6 months or so, we'll see Greece resolve itself one way or the other, and then we'll have a sense of what's going to happen to the Eurozone. And I think it's a safe bet that whatever happens, it will not be pretty, because once you borrow too much money, you lose the pretty options, and all you have left is troublesome ones. And that's really where Europe is right now. So it's going to be an eventful 6 months or 2 years or whatever time frame it takes to resolve all this. So we will have a lot to talk about going forward, Jim.
And I was going to say, too, back when Greece had the drachma, at least they could individually drop the value of that currency to increase tourism, their number one industry, and pretty well their only real big industry.
Yeah. I mean, you devalue the drachma, and all of a sudden those Greek beaches that everybody wants to visit get kind of cheap, and so you have this influx of people showing up with hard currency, wanting to spend it on ouzo and cabanas on the beach and charter boat tours and things like that. And so the economy picks up. Well, they can't really do that without devaluing the entire euro, the whole eurozone devaluing, and that's more than Germany is willing to accept. And so it can't happen. So we'll see. But right now, I think the guys who have been elected in Greece are fairly serious about not putting up with another year or two or three of austerity, because they're in depression right now. Their unemployment rate is 20-some% overall and 50% for kids. And that's a recipe for disaster, because if half your young adults aren't working, then your society is going to go nowhere. They're not building up job skills. They're disaffected. They'll vote for anybody who promises anything in the way of relief. And so you have instability and hard times basically forever. And the Greeks obviously don't want that. So they're going to look for a solution. And that they're finding now that there are no easy solutions, but they've got to choose one. So we'll see what they do in the next few weeks with the current negotiations, and then which will really almost certainly result in just kicking the can down the road for a while, and then we'll see how they resolve it when they can't kick the can down any further.
Solar energy, of course, is one of your big areas of expertise. Just wondering, how is solar doing, and how is silver connected to it, and will silver take off if solar becomes a very viable part of the energy solution?
Well, solar is booming. What has happened in the last few years is that it's gotten cheaper and cheaper year after year, to the point where power generated from your rooftop, let's say you live in Arizona or Hawaii or a place where there's lots of sunshine, power generated from your rooftop is becoming cheap enough to compete directly with the electricity that comes to you over the grid from coal-powered power plants run by the local utility. They call that grid parity. And when that happens, it kind of opens the floodgates, because there's no reason not to put solar panels on your roof at that point. Everybody, loves the idea of solar power. It's very cool and very attractive on a lot of different levels. And when it's cheap enough so that it doesn't really cost you any money to adopt, you adopt it. And that's what we're seeing around the world. We're seeing solar power grow exponentially in many different countries and in a growing number of countries. India just announced an astoundingly large solar program for the next few years, and China is currently the biggest solar market and growing, because they have huge energy needs and pollution problems. So solar solves both of those problems for them, and they're adopting it really aggressively. And same thing is true in Japan, where they had a big nuclear plant just melt down on them, and they learned their lesson, and now they're switching to solar again. And around the world, the U.S., many parts of the U.S. are seeing dramatic increases in solar adoption. So anyhow, solar has a huge run ahead of it, because globally it's only about 1% of total electricity generation right now. And the International Energy Association has just projected that solar by 2050 will be the biggest energy source in the world. And so that's a really long run and a really long stretch of dramatic increase to get from here to there. And so I think solar is in an extended bull market, and it's only going to get better because its price keeps going down. So, when our kids are our age, solar will probably be the most important energy source in the world and will be continuing to grow from there. Now, silver is an interesting part of the solar story right now, because each solar panel, each traditional silicon solar panel, uses a little bit of silver paste to connect the panel to the outside world. It conducts electricity off the panel. And because of that, solar panels are now one of the biggest sources of demand for silver. So let that continue at the same rate, and solar panels could soak up most of the available silver a few years hence. And the question is, though, do they come up with a technological advance that allows them to use less silver and replace it with cheaper materials? And that's always a danger in technology, because anything that is a significant part of the cost of something draws a lot of research into ways to either get rid of it or minimize it. And the same is true with silver right now. So there are different ways to use less silver in solar panels, and the industry is addressing it. They're looking into it. Right now, they haven't found anything that's immediately threatening to silver, but it might happen in the future. So this is the kind of thing where it's soaking up a lot of silver right now. We should enjoy that and hope for good things from the future from the solar industry vis-a-vis silver. I think there's a good chance that it continues to use significant amounts of silver, and that supports the silver market going forward, especially once things really get going in both silver prices and solar at the same time. You know, we could see a really nice pop and could see silver becoming or solar becoming a bigger, more public part of the silver story going forward.
Can solar power work in a country like Canada?
As it gets cheaper, it gets economic in less and less hospitable sunny places. So the time will come if solar continues to drop in cost by 5 or 10% a year, that it works in Vancouver, that it works, right now, Germany has been one of the biggest markets for solar in the world, and the UK is becoming one of the biggest markets. And those are not notoriously hot, sunny places, right? But solar is still working there.
Let's just say one of the coldest Augusts I ever had was a summer in Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Germany, you look at it on a map, it's fairly at a fairly high latitude.
Yeah.
And so right now that's in part because of generous government subsidies. But as solar's cost decreases, it's getting closer and closer to being economic straight up without subsidies in a lot of these places. So it's really a question of timing, when, not if, solar becomes viable in northern latitudes and less sunny places. So I don't know which year it will be when solar becomes as cheap as electricity generated by your local utility, but that time is coming. And when it does, there's no reason not to use solar power. It's just going to spread like crazy all around the world. So this is a bull market that will last for 30, 40, 50 years. And the only question is, from the standpoint of an investor, is what's your entry point? Do you trust the overall stock market, and are you worried that it's going to crack and pull down the prices of silver or of solar stocks? And I am worried about that. So I think there's probably a better entry point sometime in the next couple of years when the booming stock market finally has its inevitable bear market, and that pulls down tech in general and solar in particular, and gives us a really nice entry point. So I'm looking forward to that day.
We'll have more with John Rubino right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking to John Rubino, author of several books on the economy, including The Money Bubble, his website, dollarcollapse.com. John, Elon Musk, the developer of the Tesla electric sports car, now has come up with a battery pack for your home. Is that another way that solar could become very viable for your average electricity consumer?
Yeah, efficient energy storage, good batteries, are crucial to the continuation of the solar bull market. Because as you said, solar power only works when the sun's shining. And when the sun's shining, solar panels tend to generate too much electricity. So you have to figure out what to do with it. You can feed it back onto the grid, but utilities aren't crazy about having massive amounts of solar being fed into their grid because they think it's destabilizing. But one thing you can do beyond that is to put some batteries in your basement, have your solar panels charge those batteries in the daytime, and then you run your house off of those batteries in the evening. And so once batteries get cheap enough for that, then you have this package that you can buy where you get the solar panels and the batteries all as part of one deal that saves you a lot of money. And so what Elon Musk is doing is trying to generate economies of scale that bring down the price of batteries to the point where they work for this kind of a deal. And so he's building some big battery factories and expecting to sell them to homeowners and to the makers of electric cars for lower and lower prices, which increases the attractiveness of those products. You know, solar panels and electric cars get better and better as the battery technology that runs them get better and better. So if it works, and it looks like it's going to, I mean, battery costs have been falling for the last few years, and there's no reason why ramping up production wouldn't push the cost down further, as long as the raw materials are available in sufficient quantities. Then we'll reach a point where it becomes a good deal for you to put solar panels on your roof and then batteries in your basement and then more or less go off grid. You know, you keep your connection to the local utility in case you need extra power or in case something happens to your system or whatever, but you really don't need much of their electricity because you're more or less self-sufficient at home. And that's in so many ways, that's a great thing because distributed power generation is a lot more robust. You know, right now, if a big power plant goes down or some high power lines get cut, you lose power. You have a blackout in a fairly large area. But if everybody has solar panels on their roofs and batteries in their basement, blackouts are very unlikely because you're just generating your own power. You know, it doesn't matter what happens to the grid to you. And so that's good from a, you know, anti-terrorist standpoint. It's good from an economic standpoint, where energy security is crucial because we can't function with the grid down. And it's also good from an environmental standpoint because coal-fired power plants are very dirty in a lot of ways. They're not good for the environment. And to the extent that we can replace them with solar power, which doesn't generate carbon, doesn't generate any other kind of air pollution, then we clean up the environment. At the same time, we improve the robustness of our energy infrastructure. So it's a win-win for everybody, except, you know, big oil, coal companies, the electric utilities that have a lot of sunk costs in coal-fired power plants and high power lines to transport the electricity from one place to another. You know, these guys will have to deal with the changing environment, and they'll do what they can to slow down the transition because they're threatened by it. But I think the transition is inevitable, and everybody just has to deal with it. So it'll be fun to watch the process unfold, but I think the ultimate destination is pretty much fixed now, and that is a time when most people have some kind of an alternative energy generation system, either locally in their town or actually in their home, and so that power generation is decentralized and clean almost everywhere in the world.
And of course, something that hasn't been developed a lot is tidal power. It's sitting there. I mean, BC with Vancouver Island, our tides are variable all the way along the coast, so you don't have a gap in production from it. There's a company called Blue Energy that has low-speed turbines you put into coastal areas where you have a lot of tidal movement. It doesn't harm the fish or the environment, doesn't impede the water flow in any way. And yet a place like British Columbia you'd think would be a natural for it, and we don't have any.
Yeah, tides are basically free energy. You know, it's all that water moving in and out and in and out. And also waves, which you can, in theory, set a generator on the surface, you know, something that catches the power of waves and uses that to generate electricity. That technology isn't as mature. It turned out to be very hard to do, you know, because salt water is corrosive and tides and waves are predictable in a general sense, but not always in a specific sense. You know, they can really bang up generating equipment. So we don't have something technologically that can be just rolled out everywhere and be a challenge to solar or wind or you know, the more mature clean technologies. But we shouldn't write it off. I mean, that's a lot of free energy right there. So I think that some of the research that's going on now will result in some technologies that work, and they will be rolled out, and that'll be a part of the mix in the future. Now, the question is, does solar just continue to get cheaper and cheaper to the point where it makes all these other clean energy sources unnecessary because they can't lower their costs quickly enough to keep up with solar? So why bother? Why not just put solar panels everywhere? Because there's no real downside to that. So that could be a market dynamic that makes it hard for the other clean technologies to gain a foothold.
Places that have gone to wind power, for example, everybody cites the fact that oil is still much cheaper than wind generation.
Yeah. I mean, wind has made a lot of progress, but there are limits to the cost reductions with current technology. It's going to get cheaper and cheaper, but it's not falling in cost as quickly as solar is. So I think that solar is still more expensive than wind by some calculations, but its cost is falling faster. So the question is, how much more can solar fall in cost going forward? Can it continue the 5 or 10% decrease in cost that it's seen in the last few years for another 10 years or 20 years? If it can do that, then it's game over for basically every other energy source, And on the other hand, it might run into some technical barriers that slow down or even reverse the cost decreases. We'll have to see how that plays out. But so far, a combination of economies of scale, as bigger factories produce longer runs of solar panels at lower unit costs, and technological improvements in the way solar panels are made, continue to decrease the cost of solar, and will continue for a while. And so, how long it continues is yet to be determined, but the cost decreases are continuing right now. And so I think the solar story is really bright in the short run. And going forward, the question is, does it threaten everything else? Or does it become one part of a really varied mix of alternative energy sources? And, we'll find out. And either one is a really bright future. As long as we have viable alternative energy sources that are cheap enough to not bankrupt us when we implement them, then the world is a better place. And so the question is it all solar, or is it solar with lots of wind and some geothermal and some biofuels and some wave power and other things like that, all in one big interesting mix? And who knows? That we'll know in a decade pretty much whether it's going to be one or the other. But either way, it's good for the world that it happens.
Well, sure, here on the West Coast, every 25 miles, there's either an active volcano or an extinct volcano. So there's got to be some magma somewhere.
Yeah, geothermal is a really interesting idea because it allows you to take advantage of the differences in temperature between the surface of the Earth and further down. And in some places, like Iceland, for instance, gets most of its electricity from geothermal because it's sitting on a lot of vents. Places where there's a crack in the Earth that allows heat to bubble up. And either it's a geyser in the form of water, or magma, as you said, or just an opening that you can get down to, and you put a pipe down there, and you through circulating fluids are able to run steam generators and generate electricity in that way. Well, that's all doable, and that technology is moving forward as well. And it's clean, it's fairly quiet. You can put them pretty much anywhere without any kind of environmental disruption, and so it's very attractive. It requires the right kind of geology, though. So it's not something, just as solar requires a sunny place, and geothermal requires a place where you can get at that heat cheaply.
John, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Oh, sure, Jim. Enjoyed it.
My guest has been John Rubino, author of several books on the economy, including The Money Bubble. His website is dollarcollapse.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.